Our speaker this evening, Dr. Nurit Fischer-Shemer, knows the importance of keeping the voices of memories alive. Dr. Fischer-Shemer is the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. She has a PhD in social welfare, and she's studied the effects of mass trauma, such as the Holocaust, on the next generations. Our world today has seen, and unfortunately continues to see, altogether too much mass trauma. By educating ourselves and others, by hearing the voices that came before us, we take the first step towards hope for the future. Born and raised in Israel, Dr. Fischer-Shemer moved to Buffalo in 2003. She holds a pharmacy degree from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, a master's in science and technology education from Ben Gurion University of the Negev, and a doctorate in social welfare from UB. While pursuing her PhD and studying the multi-generational effects of the Holocaust, Dr. Fischer-Shemer interviewed 70 children of survivors in Western New York. She has presented her findings at national and international conferences. Tomorrow at noon, she will conduct an interactive lunch and learn. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Nurit Fischer-Shemer.
Thank you for having me today, and good evening. Before I start, I would first like to thank the Jewish Federation of Greater Rochester, the Center of Holocaust Awareness, and its director, Mrs. Bonnie Abrams. Thank you for the Jewish Community Center for this space. Thank you to the Holocaust survivors and their families. And thank you to all the members of the Rochester community here today. In our current environment, we need to remember. We need to overcome gaps in awareness about the Holocaust history and about its aftermaths. We need to find ways to make sure that lessons are learned and applied by the next generations. It is essential we raise awareness of the dangers of normalizing hatred and violence in today's world, of vandalism against Jews in Brooklyn, of attacks of synagogues like the Tree of Life or La Simcha in Pittsburgh, and just this week in Poway Synagogue outside of San Diego, of the deliberate destructions of headstones in Jewish cemeteries, hatred manifestations in our universities. We must remember the horrific outcomes that can occur in a society that routinizes hate crimes against any other. Abel Jacob Herzberg, a lawyer, a writer, legal scholar, and a Bergen-Belsen survivor, once said, "There were not 6 million Jews murdered. There was one murder 6 million times." When discussing this quote, Thomas Bergenthal, one of Auschwitz's youngest survivors, explained, and I quote, "One of the problems with the 6 million number is that nobody can imagine that. You cannot personalize 6 million. You can personalize one person. I think it expresses a reality. It is true, because each one of those souls was killed, and each one had individuality on his own, a history, a memory, a life. And that is lost in this whole discussion when we sort of cavalierly go over and speaks about 6 million. It is important to keep that in mind," end quote. According to the US National Survey of Holocaust Awareness and Knowledge, performed by the Claims Conference last year, 11% of the adults and 22% of the millennials in the United States never heard or are not sure whether heard or not of the Holocaust. There were more than 40,000 concentration camps and ghettos in Europe during the years of the Holocaust. Yet almost half of Americans cannot name even a single one. More than 2/3 of young people in the United States never heard of Auschwitz. About 80% of all Americans never visited any Holocaust museum. At the same time, the survey indicated that the majority of Americans believe that there is a need to teach the Holocaust events in all schools to make sure it doesn't happen again. From this survey, some important questions arise. How do we make sure we overcome the current gaps in Holocaust education and awareness, as fewer and fewer survivors remain with us to tell their stories? How do we make sure that the events and memories are remembered? And I will add to Herzberg and Burgenthal. While we aim to personalize each and every one of the 6 million souls that were murdered, we also need to personalize each and every survivor's story. Each survivor has their own history and memories. Each has a path out of inferno into the new life. We need to make sure that their experiences and memories are remembered when they will no longer be able to tell those stories to the world. We need to continue and do it for them. Today, I'm going to share with you one survivor's story. I'm going to share with you the survival story of my grandma, my Savta in Hebrew. I will share her history to the best of my ability. She is no longer here to tell it herself. I will try to be her voice today to tell the story of her behalf. My grandmother, Savta Ibi, was a special woman. She had many different names. Some names she liked better than others. Some she didn't like at all. But all were her names, even those she hated. My Savta Ibi was born in 1924 in Marmaris, Transylvania. Her mother, Margaret, was from Hungary. Her father, Mordechai, was from Romania. The lines bordering the countries Hungary, Romania, and Transylvania explain some of the names she had, but not all of them. The name my Savta was given at birth was Reisele Rosenberg. It was written on traditional documents of the community. And Reisele Rosenberg was the firstborn of Mordechai and Margaret Rosenberg. And she liked the name Reisele. But the Romanian government and the neighbors required a Romanian name. The official name she was given was Viorica, which in Romanian means violet. It was written on the birth certificate that was given to her parents, and that was the name the teachers called her, and the name her friends called her when she played with them outside, running after the geese, building snowmen with carrot noses in the winter, and ice skating on the frozen pond. And the name Viorica was okay. My Savta Ibi Reisele Viorica Rosenberg spoke Yiddish and Hungarian at home and with friends, and Romanian with her father. The one and only picture that survived the days before everything changed, is here to share with you. This picture was sent to a relative in Canada on the 24th of May, 1937. And in this picture, you can see my Savta with 4 out of her 6 younger siblings, Ibi, Jigo, Leopold, Yino, Tibor, and 2 other siblings were not born yet then. In August 1940, the Nazis gave the Hungarian government control over the part of Transylvania where my Savta Ibi lived. The Hungarian government required a Hungarian name. The official name she was given now was Iboya, Ibi in short. This name had to be written on all governmental documents, all identification papers, and the family got a legal stamped copy. And now my Savta was Ibi at home in the community, and when the Melamed came to teach Torah and Judaism, and she was called Iboya in school by the teachers, and she was a good teacher and curious student, and got good grades. She liked to play, to read, to sew, and to stitch, and she had a good childhood. She didn't worry about all the different names, and she liked very much the name Ibi, Iboya. But at 1944, my Savta was 19 years old, things changed. It was Passover night. 2 German soldiers were on the way to the Russian front, and they knocked on the door. They were invited to join the dinner table, and they told the family what was happening to the Jewish people in Poland. All the adults were sure the Hungarian will protect their Jews and will not cooperate with the Nazis. No. My Savta Ibi remembered that her father Mordechai told her, "I hope we will not be crying tomorrow. The stage is the same stage, and the performance is the same performance. It's just change of the background, the actors, and the crew." The following morning, Mordechai went to the shul to share with the rabbi and the community what the soldiers told him. Everybody agreed it will never happen in Marmaris. Less than a week later, all the Jews of Marmaris were instructed to go to the local synagogue. They were locked there. For 2 whole days, they were in the synagogue, and then they were sent to Satumar ghetto. And I will share with you a short segment in Hebrew about how bad was the ghetto. Okay. No sound? Okay, I guess we will speak the segment because of sound issues. My Savta is talking here about taking the train to ghetto Satmar, how 10 people were cramped in one room with barely place even to sit down, and that her grandmother was with them, and the conditions were, as you can see, terrible, horrible, and she didn't even remember what they had to eat in all this time in the ghetto. The ghetto of Satumar, next slide, please. Seems like, I'm sorry. The ghetto of Satumar was liquidated between May and June 1944, when the Nazis deported 8,863 Jews from Satumare to Auschwitz in 6 transports. My Savta Ibi was in the third transport. She carried her baby brother the whole time. And after 3 days of quiet and confused trip, the train stops and the doors opened. Whoever was able to stand was commanded to do so. Not everybody in the wagon could. Then they had to wait. Soldiers and people in striped, weird clothes told them to keep quiet and obey all orders. Women and children had to stand in one line, men in the other. The line where my Savta stood started to move forward. The people in the striped clothes whispered to all the young mothers, "Give the babies to the grandmothers." Dr. Mengele, with the dog on his side, was at the end of the line. He made the selection. Some were sent to the right, others were sent to the left. My grandmother did not know it back then, but she had arrived to Auschwitz. Those who were sent to the left were sent to death. To the right, to work. My Savta was sent to the right, except of Zhigo, one of her siblings, who was not on the train with them because he escaped. She never saw anyone from her family again. My Savta Ibi was taken with other women to a large shed. Her hair was shaved. She was instructed to take a quick shower, and then she was given a robe. Then she was given another name, the name that her haters gave her. And my Savta Ibi, Reisele Viorica Violet Iboya Rosenberg, became A13208. But this time the name was not written on a birth certificate, and no stamped document was given to anyone. This time the name was tattooed on her left arm. It was small, dark blue, with a tiny dash between A and the number 13208. And when this name was called, my Savta Ibi had to respond quickly in order not to be beaten. And this new name became her identity, and she hated it. In the barracks, she had to go with no beds. 100 women were cramped into bunks. She slept on the floor. Young mothers cried night after night, calling their babies. After 5 months in Auschwitz, my Savta decided to go to selection again. She used to tell me, "I did nothing in Auschwitz all day, doing nothing. Time was standing still. People were saying that if you are chosen to go to work, you'll get a little bit more food and better clothing. I was young and strong. I decided to take my chance." And she made it. My Savta Ibi, A13208, was sent to Gorlitz in Eastern Germany. Nearby, there was a labor camp. After 3 days in the train, 300 women arrived to Görlitz. The camp had 2 parts, the women's part with 300 women and the men part with 1,500 men. Every morning, everybody walked 2 hours, often in the snow, to a German ammunition factory. They worked all day, and they walked 2 hours back. They walked in clogs. All my life, my Savta hated seeing me wearing clogs. It was one of the coldest winters of the 20th century in Europe. Temperatures got below -10 degrees, but still they were lucky. The women were very lucky. They had a good couple, a Jewish German doctor, and she made sure that all the women will get all the leftover food from the factory, and she treated them nicely. From the 300 women, 299 survived. The horrible conditions, the long walk, the freezing weather, and the hard labor. The men were less lucky. Of the 1,500, only 500 survived. On February 1945, they were taken all to a death march. They walked about 20 miles a day with very little food, and they walked about a month only to find out that they were made to march in a circle. They got back to the camp, but they didn't go to work anymore. The Russians were getting closer. One morning, they got up and found that the Germans left, and they left them some food. A week after Germans left, the Russians arrived, and they were free. My Savta Ibi went back to her village in Marmores, hoping to find family and survivors. She didn't find anyone. Kind Hungarian neighbor let her stay with them. 1 month after she came back, Zhigo, her brother, returned. He was the only survivor from the family. At the end of 1945, my Savta Ibi married my grandfather, Gabriel Geise Isaac, and legally changed her name from Rosenberg to Isaac. She was 21 years old. At the end of 1946, she gave birth to the only person in the world who will ever call her mother, my mom. When she left Europe in 1950 and went to Israel, my Savta Ibi Reisele Viorica Violet Iboya A13208 changed her family name again, from Isaac to Yitzhak. She worked hard in Israel, in any work she could find. She picked oranges, cleaned, cooked, sewed, made dresses, and eventually found permanent work as a cook and a caterer in an event hall. She learned to cook amazing Hungarian dishes and baked exquisite cakes. In 1966, she became a mother-in-law. My parents got married. And in 1967, she became a grandmother. During the years, she would have 4 granddaughters who will call her Savta, Savta Ibi. My Savta Ibi got to have naches from a very big family. She accompanied all her granddaughters to their wedding, and she had many grandchildren who called her Savta and Savtush and Savtale, names that loving family members call you. But the truth is that she lived all her life in 2 worlds. Whenever she bought us a new pair of shoes, she talked about the clogs there. When she cooked her delicious food, and believe me, she was an amazing cook, she often mentioned the potato soup that had more water than potato there. She sometimes talked about Satu Mare, Marmores, on the trip back home after the war, but most of the stories were about the place she felt was the real place that defined her, Auschwitz. She talked about the many places she worked in, but mostly about her work in the ammunition factory. And sometimes, only sometimes, there were days, she was able to look at the name on her left arm and feel that after all she won. Thank you for letting me share my Savta story with you today. I hope and believe she would have been happy to know you heard it through me, and that I was able to be the voice for her memory. We must not only remember the legacies of those who perished and those who survived. We have to keep the memory and translate it into action for the next generations, to make sure that what my Savta experience never again become a reality to anyone. Let us be the voice of memory for the victims as well as for the survivors. Thank you very much.